I'm going to take a look at some pitching mechanics, and in particular, the point of the pitching delivery early in the delivery to the point where the front foot has just landed. So the foot plans in the front, and at that point, the pitch will be sometimes called the high cock position, or the ball will be high in the air. And we'll take a look at that in a couple of pictures. Notice here that I drew two red lines. One is from the heel of the pitcher's back foot, and one is from the toe and coming perpendicular off the pitching rubber. The reason for that is it's a good way to visualize and see how a younger pitcher you might be working with is doing. Most major leaguers will land the front foot within those two lines, somewhere in those two lines. So it's a good sort of target for a younger pitcher to try to achieve. Some pitchers in the major leagues do land a little bit to the right of the toe line here, but I would say they're in a minority. And for the most part, I've seen the good pitchers get the front foot, the lead foot, somewhere between those two red lines, often closer, in fact, to the heel line than to the toe line. Again, this is a good way for it to visually see how a young pitcher might be doing. I made a schematic, and imagine you're kind of in a helicopter looking straight down at the pitcher. Home plate, you can see in this case, is over to the left, so the pitch direction is from right to left. And the white bar represents the pitching rubber, and the foot there is the back foot of the pitcher. And again, I've drawn lines from the heel and the toe straight out, again, to try to give you a target zone for the way the front foot should be landing. And we're going to take a look at some of the details of how that front foot moves down the mound and into contact with the mound. A major leaguer here, this is after he's lifted his leg to the highest point. He's starting to come down the mound. You can see the front foot is off the ground, obviously. And the front foot and front leg are relatively closed. They're pretty much perpendicular to the pitch direction. And you'll see that sort of arrangement is kept for a long part of the delivery. It really doesn't change until the front foot just comes into landing. Looking at the next picture, you can see how his front foot isn't very far off the ground anymore. And yet he still has the foot perpendicular to the pitch direction. He hasn't opened up or rotated the hips yet. And I think this is very important. As the pitcher moves down the mound, so to speak, he keeps it in a relatively closed position until the very end. And in the very end, he should be rotating his body into position properly. Also notice here that the hips are also aligned with the pitch direction, as in fact are the shoulders. Again, you'll see in the next slide, as the front foot is planting, this changes quite dramatically as the foot moves that last little bit from the height that it is here, and so the front foot is fully firmly planted onto the mound. What's happened here is the front foot has rotated quite a bit. Front leg is rotated quite a bit, such that the front foot is now pointed right to the catcher, to the home plate. So he's gone from being into a closed position to an open position by rotating that front leg. Significantly, the hips have also rotated, so the legs and hips, and in fact back leg, have all rotated pretty significantly. This has happened while the foot is up in the air. Going back to the previous slide, the front foot and hips are again relatively closed, and that last little bit as the front foot is coming down, boom, there's a rotation. So by the time the front foot lands, the hips are rotated. If you look at his belt buckle, you can imagine that belt buckle would point largely toward the direction of the catcher. Not all the way, but he's getting there. The back foot is also lifted up onto toe. That is because of the firm, strong rotation of the hips. So pretty significant here. Again, this is the front foot plant, or sometimes I've heard it called launch position or high cock position. You can see the ball in his hand is probably at the highest point that he would have it in the delivery. Significantly here also is the fact that the shoulders at the same position in time still are aligned with the pitch direction. In other words, they haven't rotated very much. They're still kind of back, even though the bottom half is largely rotated toward the toward the catcher. I think that's that separation. The lower half is well rotated, while the top half is not, is pretty significant, and it's something that you can look for as you look at video of younger players. Again, this is probably the most critical position right here. If you take a photograph of any player, you can try to understand whether or not they're getting close to these kind of geometries. Again, I mentioned before how it's pretty common that the pitchers, you see in the major leagues, they do rotate their hips prior to their front foot landing. Here's a pitch and a major league pitcher, Lee, showing how as his foot is coming down, he's rotating the hips. The hips are not, and they continue to rotate after the foot lands, but there's a considerable amount of rotation that happens prior to that front foot landing. And this picture is kind of nice. These two pictures that you can see how he rotates his hip toward the catcher, how the front leg and the foot are pointing to the catcher. He locates his front foot near the back heel line, so that blue line, he opens it up pretty well. And in the right hand pitch, you can see how his shoulders are pointing toward the catcher also. And finally, talking about the distance that a pitcher would stride. Looking at major leaguers, they generally are going to stride about 90 to 100% of the pitcher's height. So if a pitcher is 6 foot, the distance from the rubber to the front of the toe is going to be about 6 feet. A little less than that is probably okay. Also, 90% would probably be fine for a pitcher. But it's a good check, again, with younger pitchers. A lot of the younger players don't stride long enough. With my son, I would actually take the bat and scratch out these 3 lines. I would take the toe line, the heel line, and drag out those lines, and then try to get his height. I've actually had him lie down on the ground and put his feet on the rubber, and I scratch out a line where his head was. So he has some target. And as you're doing practice, you can see, how far am I striding, or am I striding too much to the right or to the left? It gives a quick visualization for a player to see kind of how they're doing relative to sort of the way major leaguers pitch. And the way I look at it, if major league pitchers and good major league pitchers pitch in a certain way, it's a good thing to learn from them and try to do it yourself.